Hey everyone, welcome back to the Weekly Awakening Podcast. This is your host, Cosmic Colleen. And today is not a weekly awakening. Are you guys ready for it? Especially my longtime listeners. I am having another interview. I know it has been 2 years, and for my lifelong followers, it has been a long time, but I met Connor Wills, aka Ghost Pipe, New Jersey online, and we had an instant connection. And of course, I had to look at his astrology chart, and he actually said to me, I would love to be on your podcast. And I thought, you know what? This is a good time to bring this back. I like this guy's energy. What does Connor do? Well, Connor, first of all, is a holistic psychotherapist, and he has a company, the largest holistic psychotherapy group called Quantum Holistic Psychotherapy in New Jersey. He has been building it for 15 years. He also takes his spiritual holistic practices outside the walls and brings it to a nice dance flow with tribal beats, DJing, plant medicine. So he has everything that my listeners love to hear about. Say hello and thank you, Connor, for coming on to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm stoked.
I'm excited, and I'm looking at you and I just love your vibe already. So let's jump in. I'm really curious about what made you begin your holistic practice. And was it always holistic at first? Did you want to kind of jump into that otherworldly spiritual psychotherapy, or did you start out as a regular psychotherapist?
Sure, I could peruse my resume a little bit. So yeah, I started in the field 15 years ago in 2010, and I've always been attracted to higher levels of care, as we say. So like community mental health, hospitals, residential settings, kind of like the more heavy substance use and mental health related needs. And I've always just been interested in what works. I really believe that nobody has more feelings towards like quote unquote unhelpful, I'll say, therapy than other therapists who are doing great work. And that's probably for any profession, right? I know friends of mine in law enforcement, same thing. Cop does something wrong on TV, they're more upset than anybody about it because it makes them look bad. So I'm always interested in what seems to work cross-culturally, cross-demographics. And what I've found more and more is that taking a more holistic approach, a wide lens approach of mind, body, spirit, it allows you to really meet the individual and unique needs of every client, family, regardless of culture. So how did I come to this was just trying different things out and keeping what worked.
What'd you try out first, holistically?
No. I mean, I'm saying with the more medical model per se. We
okay.
do a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a wonderful model. Don't get me wrong, it's heavily researched, but a lot of these more traditional talk therapy, cognitive, they're just not sufficient enough, wide range enough to meet the unique needs of people's lives today. I find you need more than that.
What layers do we need more of?
Sure. You want me to deep dive and get real nerdy
deep dive.
right now?
Yeah, we want to hear it. We love it. Let's hear that Aquarius vibe in you.
There you go. So for us at Quantum, what we find is that targeting what's called the autonomic nervous system tends to be a really good place to start. When I started in this field, if we want to take anxiety, quote unquote, and depression, quote unquote, that's kind of it was almost like a 50-50 of what you see. Most people are either feeling sad and stuck and down, or they're overwhelmed.
Absolutely.
Now it's so much more anxiety. 9 out of 10 people who call it, it's anxiety. And I know colleagues of mine in the field see the same thing. So traditionally, what we do is we talk about the anxiety. We talk about your beliefs and thoughts, and we kind of analyze them and try to reframe them. And there's value in that. But with the nervous system, if we don't get that part aligned first in the body, the front part of my brain here, the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex, we can't get that online. It's not as accessible. And this is where we do all of our planning and solution focus. So many of us have probably had the experience of being with a therapist or even a friend or a partner, and you're so overwhelmed and swirling, and someone's trying to give you advice or help you strategize, and you're I can't even absorb this right now. Right? So that's why when people say I've done therapy, it wasn't helpful. Well, because you probably weren't targeting the root source of the anxiety, which is the nervous system. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. So do you then incorporate breathing exercises, meditation, Reiki then to sort of get into the soul body before unleashing and unlocking the mind?
Yeah. Totally. And again, every client we say in the field, we meet the client where they're at. So it's really understanding there's not a one size fits all. But when we're talking, and I sense there's an element of quote unquote anxiety, which we just think of as excess energy in the body.
Oh, I
It's
like
kind of like
that.
if you're at a red light and you have your foot on the gas, and then like when you first get your license, you're like, what happens if I like crank the gas while my foot's on the brake too? And you start to stall out. It's kind of like that. Like there's too much energy and where does it go? So for when it comes to the nervous system, breath, sound, movement, and temperature are the four things we do.
Oh,
So definitely giving a unique regimen to every client, much like a personal trainer. We try different things. You pick what works for you. You're the expert of you. Meditation, breath work, cold exposure, right? Movement, this kind of thing.
we need that. For my anxiety is I don't really have it. And I like to say I'm all Mercury. So at my ADHD, even if I like have a little of anxiety, I'm on to the next thought and I'm gone. However, and on this podcast, I've talked a lot about it. My younger son, who is all earth energy, he has had a lot in this last year. It's always kind of been present. He turned 8, turning 9, and he's had a lot of like his soul kind of understands the world at a level he shouldn't be at his age and has a ton of
Mm,
anxiety. And he has a lot around food and getting sick to the point where he still has not ate lunch at school. And
wow.
yes, and so he's come a long way. The first half of the year was like at 100%. The second half of the year has been at a nice 10%. And through therapy, the school, and working with him myself. But one of the things that I have learned in understanding my younger son, who is different than me, and I think this is just a tied into what you're saying, is he blows up, his anxiety gets everywhere. And I noticed that I couldn't get to him unless I grounded him, and for
Mhm.
not actually grounded him, but grounded his energy. So I would, sometimes he would fight me on it, but I'd make him go upstairs to his room. I would put on a frequency for him. I'm a huge fan of frequencies for him, and usually have to get him some food. He's got a lot of Taurus in him, and then give him like 10 to 15 minutes sort of alone in his room within that, especially with the frequency. And almost every time then we can sit and I can like kind of break through to him, even if it's only for that moment. But just like you
Yes.
said, in my experience with him, I have to get him at this open level and this calmness, or nothing, he won't hear anything.
Right. It's just neuroscience and body science at the end of the day. It's understanding how to be efficient, getting to the root cause instead of just talking about coping. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? If someone's not in a place to receive, there's plenty of research around this. I mean, if you go into a meeting at work and you're having stress at home, you're not able to absorb information like you would otherwise. So it's understanding, I guess, again, from a holistic place, like what does the science tell us? Which ironically is what cultures across the world have known across space and time for millennia, right? This idea of breath, sound, movement, temperature.
Did you have an experience where you first went about it in a traditional way? And then were you like, this isn't working? And maybe did you try with a patient or a client, whatever, however you call it, patient client? Did you try with them like, let's try breath work first? Like, did it sort of just happen along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I owe so much to my teachers and my training. I've had amazing mentors over this career of mine, and so I wouldn't say that it was like things were glaringly like not working, I guess, if I really am being clear, as much as like it just felt like the pace or the depth wasn't what I was hoping. Like the client has a cognitive understanding and we're talking, but there's still like not that real sustainable shift. And then, we call it a clinical hypothesis, right? I don't know you. You come into session, it's our first couple sessions, and I'm like, here's what I think might be going on. Let's try some things, and based on how you respond, it will inform us if our hypothesis is very much correct and not correct or somewhere in between. So if I'm sensing anxiety and we're doing a breathwork regimen, and now let's say a somatic complaint like nausea before school, very common for kids today, if all of a sudden you're doing a breathwork regimen and now you're no longer having nausea before school, it just informs our hypothesis that we're correct because we're not scanning your body to know 100% for sure how the tone of your vagus nerve is.
Yeah.
We're just inferring based on patterns and testing that
So you're finding that's pretty common right now with kids, the nausea right before school?
massively. School avoidance, somatic complaints in the nurse, nausea. Um, I mean, I've had more clients than I can count the last couple of years that have that kind of stuff going on, and knock on desk. I don't think we've had a single client at Quantum who, when they're actually using these practices that we write out, these regimens that we create with them, not one that is unable to either have it completely subside or reduced enough where at least they're getting to school or functioning socially, whatever the goal is.
Wow. Wow. A lot of
Yeah.
my hair clients, actually, their children there's been a few that have really been struggling this year with also getting to the school. And one thing I've noticed that's jumping to the collective, and I pay attention to what's happening around and I watch my clients, right? I'm sort of like a psychologist in the astrology and in the hair world
Yes.
that I'm watching there is, like you said, astronomical amounts of anxiety out there. And the one thing that I can connect it to and see is just the ever growing online connections, right? I mean, so we went from just 10 years ago, maybe someone could only reach you through text. There wasn't even group text, a phone call, an email, to now 10,000 people can get in touch with you 10,000 ways. And then you're always having just boom, 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 boom. And I feel like Google has been one of the worst things for anxiety. Like, we're not meant to have all of this in our mind and our fingertips. However, that's the way it's evolving. So I feel like we are the ones that are stuck in this limbo.
1,000%. And I mean, there's an existential crisis happening, I think, in our culture and on our planet. And there's a lot to be concerned about, from wars to environment, politics, culturally, I mean, on and on and on. And there's probably a skew of what sells is the scary stuff. So there's a lot of good happening.
Yeah.
That's also not being talked about. A lot of hopefulness, a lot of other perspectives on certain things that are not being shared by certain media outlets. But, when we think about our nervous systems and our amygdala and our brain, our fight, flight, freeze, these things are designed for survival, straight up. In one word, it's survival. So it's not like a, quote, bad thing to recognize that we're in these existential crises and we're feeling this elevated anxiety. And because our nervous systems mirror each other, we actually call them mirror neurons in the brain. They're also involved in that. I go to my school, and 30% of the kids in my grade are overly anxious, and it has an impact on me. Now we're in this almost like what do you call it, like a silo effect, right?
Well, they say that the energy around us is, our own energy is pushed out 3 feet around us.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree with that? And so that kind of coincides when you can just be sitting beside someone and not really talking to them, but you're taking in and observing their energy.
Yeah, I mean, they've done research around the electromagnetic field around the heart and like heart rate variability, HRV and stuff like this. And I know they say that, I don't know if it's exactly 3 feet, but there is a frequency that is measurable. It's not woo-woo, it's scientific. There's a measurable frequency around the body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we all have this gift of intuition. I know you're highly intuitive and perceptive, and people will say to me, I know I'm highly intuitive and perceptive, but I'm like, I'm not actually special. We all have this understanding. It's just that some of us, like you and I, are more open to receiving the world in that way than others are.
Right. How much is in the way?
How much is in the way?
We talk about manifestation. For me, it's very scientific. It's almost very measurable. It's not magic, in my opinion. Right? If I want to get a new job and I'm like focusing on it, I sit in the morning, I'm meditating on it, right? My brain waves are in a place where I'm more malleable, and I wake up and the first thing I do is go into some kind of a loving kindness meditation or just focusing on an intention that I have, right? And then I go about my day. I'm more likely to bring that up in conversation, which may lead to an opportunity. Oh, my uncle is hiring, I'm more likely to be present and see a flyer. But if I'm just in my head, stressed, suppressing, going through the motions on my phone, I'm not having these conscious, calm conversations where I'm naming these things. I'm not as observant to things around me in the way that I'm wanting. I'm more heightened in my nervous system, more hyper aware, but maybe not on these kind of more important things. So when it comes to manifestation, I think it's all about staying regulated and present. It's very scientific. There's nothing woo-woo about it.
No, nothing. I love manifesting all the things that I've created in my life. And it also ties into the very simple explanation is that your world is created by your mind, not vice versa. It does have that influence, and I always say on my show, you need to be working out your mind as hard as you work out your body. And
100%.
We're just beginning to unlock the minds of all of us in the collective. And every day, like being happy. I mean, obviously there can be outside circumstances, death, things along those lines, but like being happy, and I like to say some astrology, it does come easier to others, but is a daily practice. And for me, I know it's a daily practice in staying grounded in what's around me and staying grateful in what's around me. That almost instantly can get me out of myself again, because so much we go down this rabbit hole. But if I sit there and just you say out loud what I'm grateful for, I almost always can like jolt into happiness again.
Mm-hmm. I would say again, from my humble opinion, I think presence or mindfulness is foundational, because in this busy world and the responsibilities and the connectivity and the trauma and all the things, if I can't create these little moments, even just a breath or two, literally, what can spring from that is infinite. And in that, I can notice gratitude. Right? There's a million psychological studies on perception and awareness and what you focus on, you know. So if I have some presence, I create a little space, 5 minutes a day, 30 seconds of breath here, I can bring gratitude. And with gratitude, I can feel connected to something greater. I can feel peace. And I think peace, balance, or equanimity, as the Buddhists would say, is more sustainable than, quote, happy.
Yeah.
A lot of times a byproduct of being present or mindful is more positive feelings, less stress. But if I'm always trying to be happy, well, the dichotomy of that is that I'm going to be sad. And now I'm in this duality, which is not, I don't think, also sustainable.
The duality between happiness and sad.
Right. If it's just happy, sad, well, if I'm not happy, then I'm sad, as opposed to like more of a spectrum of I'm just present. I don't have to attach a meaning and a
just allowing whatever shows up to show up. In the moment.
Can I be okay with that? Can I breathe with that? I tell my clients sometimes, we call it flooding in some instances in therapy, but like when you notice the feeling come up, instead of avoiding it or suppressing it, lean into it. Be like, dump on me. Like it's going to rain 3 inches today. It can either come down in 30 minutes and downpour, or it can be 12 hours of drizzle. Which do you prefer? And when you lean into an emotion, like, give me all that shit.
Yeah.
Bring it.
Bring it. Fucking bring it. That's me.
That's powerful. And your listeners could try that. Just let some anxiety show up and like, bring it. And what you'll notice is there'll be about 2 to 5 seconds of fear as it escalates. And then all of a sudden it plateaus or goes down. And it's like, oh, that's empowering.
It's very empowering. And I feel like it pushes you to the other side, and it's not so scary as our brain, you know, makes it out to be. And I guess that is inherently kind of part of our survival mode, right? Like, why do we so easily, okay, I don't want to feel that. That's push it away, or let's go party or do something to not feel. Why does that tend to be people's natural first reaction until they learn to grow past that?
I think we're at capacity. I mean, especially here in the northeastern United States, you're in PA, I'm in Jersey. I mean, this is not. I live in Colombia 3 months out of the year, in southern Colombia, in the middle of the Andes Mountains, middle of nowhere.
Oh my God.
We where we live and how we live is not, quote, normal, even in today's times. Okay, people are so at capacity, so overstimulated, such a lack of self-care, self-awareness. And I'm not placing blame or judgment, but just this is where we are as a culture, especially here. So, you know, if we were in New Jersey 500 years ago, when it was the Lenape people, I wake up, I'm moving my body all day, I'm harvesting crops, right? We're going to another village for some reason, we're hunting, breath, sound, movement, temperature. Now what do people do? Wake up, I scroll on my phone for a bit, I eat some shitty food, I go to my work or my school that I probably don't enjoy that much. I come home, maybe I drink, get high, watch Netflix, and I do it again. And I wonder why things are just building inside of my mind, body, and spirit. It's interesting.
Well, just like you described, there's this part of me I've like that wants that one day. Right now, my kids are very structured in this world, and I'm like, I wish I would have just like unschooled my kids and be living in Costa Rica or Colombia and doing that. And definitely, the more the world. And I'm one of those people, and I think there's a group of us, a lot of the awakening people that are happening right now, where I just like want to be in my commune in the woods with people away from all of this. And I'm in the Philadelphia area, and I do also say this on my podcast, my listeners, it's a pain in the ass up here. It's like I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, so it was a little more laid back than this is, but from DC up through Boston, it is just like go, 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 do. I feel like around here, compared to other places I have been or have family, there's not an appreciation for connection. Like when I first moved to the Philly area, I would just from Pittsburgh, everyone talked to everyone, and here people like don't even have time to say thank you for opening up the door, and it's just like on to the next, on to the next, on to the next, and that can be really hard. It can be hard for me sometimes in this area.
100%. Gabor Mate says the opposite of addiction is a lack of connection. And I think there's so much truth to that, whether it's drugs and alcohol or the other things we're addicted to in our culture, food, shopping, gambling, sex, porn, on and on. So I remember like I used to live in Richmond, Virginia, and my very first time in Richmond, people were so nice. I was with my two closest friends. It was my birthday. People were being so nice to us when they were from out of town. It's my birthday that I literally was like, guys, watch your wallets. Like I thought we were going to, I wasn't kidding. I was like, they're being too nice. Something's up, right? I'm used to like Manhattan.
They're about to rob us.
For real. For real. So what is normal, quote unquote, does not mean that it's quote healthy or helpful or sustainable. I've had so many clients that have immense trauma and abuse, and they're like, well, that was normal in my neighborhood or in my household or in my culture. Just because it's normal doesn't mean that it's not chipping away at us.
Yeah. And then we're seeing it all come through the body, right? With sicknesses, cancers at an all-time high, mental illness, but not just the mental illness, physical health is at an all-time high. It's being attacked. And I think combination of just like we're out of our bodies. So we're taking in drugs, taking in too much alcohol, taking in food, porn, all of those things that our mind gets so easily addicted to. Again, why are we prone to that like negativity where often positivity isn't our first reaction? It's something that comes with work.
Well, I think when any being is suffering, there's an element of wanting to relieve that suffering. And there's nothing like quote wrong with that. But I think we've just normalized so much.
Yeah.
Right? You know, something hurts, you go to the doctor in our culture, and they're going to just try to treat the symptom, not look at the underlying root cause of what's going on. And there's plenty of situations where that's necessary. So I think you take an environment where it's high pressure, high stress, go, go, go. I mean, I kind of specialize in teens, young adults, and like the pressures they get in high school and college. It's astronomical. You know, and
again, especially in this area. Sorry, especially in this area with the pressures of college.
Yes, but it's affecting us on a deep level. I mean, I'm not an expert in this area, but like my understanding is that in the New York, Philly, New Jersey area, it's some of the highest infertility rates of young women in the country.
Wow.
And they're not quite sure. Is this the water? Is this the air? Is this the stress? We have more questions than answers, perhaps, but these things are really impacting us.
Big time. Big time. And I think the stress, I remember once my chiropractor years ago told me, and that just made me think about this, that in the Delaware, New Jersey, Philadelphia area right there, we have the most pharmaceutical plants in the whole United States. And I remember him telling me that's why my allergies were so bad when I moved out here, because they got really bad. And you know, there's so many things. We're the heart right here of the kind of rebuilding the industrialized United States, but also comes with that is that stress. Now, I want to talk about that, switch it outside the walls and talk about plant medicine. On my episode last week and the week before, I was talking about Neptune moving out of Pisces and ingressing into Aries. Now, Neptune has been in Pisces for 14 years, these last 14 years. And on the episode, I was specifically talking about how wild it is when we see Neptune, right? It's dreamy, it's otherworldly, it can be illusions, delusions. But in the sign of Pisces, I feel like we look at plant medicine, soul medicine, whether it's ayahuasca, things along those lines that are happening. So I think it was really wild over the last 14 years since Neptune has been in Pisces, what we have been seeing since everything when it comes to plant medicine and using psychotherapy. You know, I mean, you see people are using with shrooms, I mean, microdosing, marijuana, MDMA, you know, psychologists, people are tying that in there. And it's really very fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about psychedelics, the first thing I always say whenever I'm being in a conversation like this is that, you know, I approach this stuff with a lot of humility. I have more questions than answers. I don't know much. I'm not a shaman. You know, I've been in these spaces quite a bit, I guess, but It's like the more I learn, the less I know is almost what I realize, right? So when we talk about traditional indigenous ceremonial plant medicines, your wachuma or San Pedro cactus, right? Active ingredient being mescaline, your ayahuasca, your 5-MeO-DMT, your psilocybin, some of these indigenous combo. There's that class, and then we have the more man-made substances. Excuse me, your MDMA, your ketamine, things like this. And I think they all offer uh, definitely major healing, and maybe it's an Instagram, internet thing, but we're also very skewed to talk about only the quote positives, the potential
Mm,
benefits. These things do have major risks. There are
yes.
definitely contraindications. And just because you find a retreat center that has you fill out a Google form about your medical history, that doesn't mean you're going to necessarily be okay. So I never encourage or discourage anyone from using these substances. However, if it feels aligned, and you don't have significant mental health history personally in your immediate family, you're not, taking certain medications, maybe you're consulting your physician, there is potential for incredible amounts of healing and awareness. Not that it's a one size fits all. You still have to do your work based on what you learn in a ceremony.
Oh, absolutely. And especially with those things, right? It's unlocking parts of the mind. So making sure you're in a mentally healthy place because you can unlock things that are not so great. In 2020, I went down to Florida and worked with a shaman and had a Cambo experience, which is not psychoactive, but it's physically active. And her and I then talked and we did an interview and we talked after my experience down there. And she grew up in Central America. So it was something that was very important to her because she felt like here in the United States, I guess it's the ayahuasca church and stuff that like she said basically in the United States people were prostituting the mother for lack of a better word and not properly using her, just sort of like I know in the one in Florida they like have like hundreds of people come in at once and they're all just using this and whether it's man-made or not. And do you feel like there's importance there, like where, doing it with indigenous people, doing it with the mindset, I mean, we know the mindset is right, but what's your take on that?
Sure. And again, I have a lot of humility around these topics. I don't know next to anything. I don't think anyone does. Anyone who claims to should probably run the other way. But what I can speak to is my experience, my own personal beliefs. Okay. Um, I know there are many indigenous healers that would say that it's a form of colonization and, it should stay here and dot, dot, dot. But there's also a lot, probably just as many I'm familiar with, who would say the opposite, where it's,
Mm,
these medicines have their own consciousness. They're trying to heal the world. They need to leave the jungle and they encourage the fact that it's being used. Now,
I love that.
you want people who know what they're doing, not just like go to Amazon.com and get your ayahuasca. There's ways to go about this, but I don't know too many, if any, healers that are so rigid. They're like, no, it must be only the indigenous model. Now, my personal belief on it is this. Um, Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, okay? If you go to Notre Dame, there's a beautiful archway of like stonework and gargoyles, and like you stand outside and you're like, whoa, right? It's just mind blowing. But then like you want to go inside the church. There's so much more inside.
Mm,
When people talk about the setting, are we in Peru, Colombia, Brazil, Costa Rica, Florida, New York? Where are we, right? They talk about the medicine carrier, the taita, the ayahuasquero, the curandero, whatever terminology we want to use. But to me, those are like the archway. This is a portal, as opposed to the whole purpose of it, which is connection to God, spirit, infinite knowledge, source consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Same thing with a phone. If you call me on the phone, Colleen, and I'm just like, wow, look at the phone, but like there's a human on the other end of that. That's really what I'm trying to access. So to me,
mm.
whether you're in New York or whether you're in Peru, is it really about the practitioner or the setting or even the medicine? You drink 1 cup of ayahuasca versus three. For some people, it might not matter. You're going to have the experience you're meant to have. You're going to blast off with one or you're going to blast off with three. So it's like we get so stuck in the 3D and the cultural stuff, and it's about connecting with the source of all things. And my personal belief is that you're going to have the experience you're meant to have, regardless of those other factors.
Oh,
Does that
yes.
make
I
sense?
love that. I actually really I agree with that. I love that. I have not done ayahuasca. Unfortunately, I don't know if you my mom's first cousin, so my second cousin, he passed away a couple years ago, but his name is Michael Gorman, and he actually for the last 35 years, 40 years led Americans into Peru and with
Wow.
the tribal, and that's what he did. He wrote a bunch of books. He died. And so I was always hoping to be able to have that experience with him, tied so deeply with my family roots, but he passed away in 2020 and I never got that chance. Though, as a former, this is what I want to understand and see what your take on it. I'm a former drug addict, right? Like when I was young, I got into the rave scene. I abused all of these potential things, got into harder things, and though I do smoke marijuana now, I got sober at 24. And I have done since smoking marijuana shrooms or psycho. I like how you use the actual proper scientific term of everything, but I use those. But sometimes I feel as though I can't always get to that level. Like there's almost when I do take them, there's almost this young addictive party side that gets to me, right? And maybe that is like I need to be in a certain space. I need to be with you in a room doing that. But when I'm on my own, so what do you suggest? I mean, again, everyone has to choose their own for people who are already prone to addiction going down these rabbit holes. Because sometimes it does help too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, holistic psychotherapist, so I'm all about getting to the root of things. So when we talk about addiction, I want to understand the root of that, right? If you have some clean time under your belt, regardless of the substance, it's a mental game at that point. You're no
Yeah.
longer physically dependent on Xanax, alcohol, heroin, whatever
Yeah.
it is. So, in the 12 step world, we'll talk about white knuckling. We're like, yeah, you're sober, but you're not changing the underlying behaviors. You're not doing the work underneath. So it's a matter of time. Or it's going to be what's called substitution, which is like, if you remember Chuck E. Cheese, the game Whack-A-Mole, it's like, okay, I'm not doing coke anymore, but now I'm watching porn twice as much. I'm gambling twice as
Yes.
much, and I'm whatever, video games, all the things. So, you know, some people have an abstinence model, the 12 step world, and that works for them. Beautiful. I'm not here to step on that or judge that.
That's what I
Some
did for 8 years.
some people do the California sober thing where it's like psychedelics, cannabis is okay. Everyone has to tap into what their truth is, but I think it comes back to intention. What is my why?
Mm.
When I go to high schools and talk to kids about substances, I always say, I'm not here to preach to you. You're going to do what you're going to do. I'm not that powerful. But know your why. If I go out on Friday and I'm having 15 beers, why?
Hmm.
Like just get curious with
Love
yourself in a
that.
very compassionate way. If I'm feeling called to use, say, psilocybin, if I'm microdosing in my backyard versus a ceremony where I'm taking 5 grams or something, it's like, well, what's your why? What is your intention? And I know people who've said ayahuasca 100 times, and no judgment, but I have questions like, what are you seeking
Yeah.
that you're not integrating? You have these incredible spiritual, psychological, somatic experiences on a medicine, and it's ideally showing you things, blind spots, dissolving the ego, paths toward healing. And somehow there's a block to your integration and following this guidance. Just like in therapy, you show up at my office once a week, but you're not doing anything outside the session. How much are you really going to grow?
Yeah. Find your why. I love that with everything and find your deeper understanding on the Weekly Awakening podcast. That's what I talk a lot. I use these planets to awaken to just understand yourself. And as a whole, like you brought up, there are so many distractions away from ourselves. And why do you think we're always escaping ourselves?
I have to sit with that. That's a great question, Colleen. Why are we always escaping ourselves? Hmm. I guess the short answer that what's coming up for me is that it's just easier.
Mm.
It's just easier. Like, I think there's a lack of belief for a lot of people that I can change my situation. It's a fascinating study in psychology called learned helplessness, which we can go into if you want. It's a very important study about um, trauma, essentially, I guess, and how we stay stuck. But um, I'll work with a client and we talk about, say, meditation. And at first, they might be very skeptical, like, how is that going to help me? Right? If I drink a beer, there's an immediate impact on my anxiety. If I just scroll on my phone, I don't have to feel. And that there's value there. Yeah, that's true in the short term, but how sustainable or helpful is that really? You know, I've heard it said the shortcut is doing the work. And eventually, I think that ties into people's spiritual awakenings, where when you suffer enough, when the pain is great enough, right, people change. And sometimes that's what it takes, because there's a lack of belief that the little day-to-day things that I do are going to add up and make a measurable difference, although they probably will.
They will. And it's right. I mean, I think when the pain gets, which is a 12 step, saying when the pain gets great enough, you'll change. That was one of the things I attribute to my deep understanding of self awakenings, was actually through a 12 step program, because it was kind of like, if you don't get to know yourself, you're going to die, right? I mean, I don't necessarily believe, I mean, I believe in that. I don't think you're going to die. They kind of hammer it in: jails, institutions, and death. But I don't necessarily believe all of that to a total degree for everyone. However, it really like kind of lit my ass on fire with like, I need to understand why I do things and why I'm doing those things. Now, I want to talk, have you have any experience with yourself, like a great experience with plant medicine and how it helped you?
Yeah, certainly. For me, I've been using these plants in some sort of a healing or ceremonial or spiritual journey way for quite some time. And again, with humility, can only speak from my experience. I find that for most folks, me included, it gives you what you need more than what you want. So you come into ceremony with an intention, and you'll probably get that to a degree, but you're going to get what you need. And I think what most people need is to understand the source of their pain and the path of their healing. It's like, you know, if you got unresolved trauma with, say, your dad, why is it going to show you like another dimension, and like you're going to go to Pluto and meet, like, you know what I mean? Like some really far out spacey shit you hear about. When like, is that really what you need? Is that really going to make, usually it starts, I think, with a healing and awareness, a lighting of the path. Then from there, if you continue to do this work and integrating, I can't stress it, integrating in between. Some people integrate for months or even years, right? Deep process. After the initial healing and you're doing the work, then it's going to start to give you, I think, more wisdom, whether that's about your own purpose in this life, in this body, whether that's about universal quote unquote truths, consciousness, the nature of reality, this really far out stuff. That has been my experience. And I continue to use it when I'm called, which is more and more rare over time, which I'm glad about. I think if it was the opposite, I would have concerns. But when I feel the call, which often, to be honest, is not when my mind wants to. I'm not stoked. I'm like, God damn it, I have to go sit in the ceremony. I don't want to do this, right? Like, you know what I mean? But I feel that deep call, and it makes sense why after. Does that help?
No, that definitely helps a lot. Now I feel anytime I take, shrooms or other things, even in I'm trying to do a meditative state, it's actually too much for me. Like even a tiny bit, I become too hyper aware of my surroundings, myself, and I do not like it. Sometimes I'm like, how was I able to do this in the extreme, having fun when I was like 18, 19? But now, like I try, again, even if I'm in sort of a ceremonial kind of setting, or same with edibles or things like that, I feel very overwhelmed. I can't even really take edibles or anything like that anymore. And that brings up my next question. How do you feel when it comes to medical marijuana and helping the mind, the psyche? I think it's very complicated and layered, kind of like the other plant medicines we talked about.
Yeah, sure. Again, everyone's on their own path. I question daily, regular use of anything.
Uh,
Not to say you can't. I mean, do you? But like, again, what is your why?
yeah.
You want to smoke weed every day. What's your why? If it's like I take an edible to go to sleep at night, okay, that makes sense. And what else are you doing to support that process if you want to be more organic, shall we say, about it? But if it's like, well, I'm smoking weed before work every day because I hate my job, again, no judgment here, but I'm curious if we're talking about the underlying why of why you hate your job, what's keeping you there, and what are the belief systems around that and the fears, and you know what I mean? So yeah, I think it's a slippery slope. I think it's a gray area for sure, and it's up to everyone to tap into their why and get really clear and honest about what that is.
Well, since I started smoking medical marijuana after a few years, it's interesting. My addictive side was right there. Like I was smoking
Hmm.
crack, you know what I mean? Kind of. And then I've had to trail it back and I've done a lot of introverted work within myself to understand. But, and I'm curious if you run into this with other ADHD people in the extreme, is I found myself, because I'm naturally very happy, is where my mind was like, it was afraid to almost be bored. This like extra layer I wanted to be, because I'm always going, 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 and I think that marijuana gives me a break from thinking, but it doesn't. It just adds a new compounded layer. So I found myself being like, oh, I'm just sitting here like I'm bored. Let me go and think. And at first it would help me with my ADHD because I could like hyper focus a little bit more onto things. But then I started to notice it did the total opposite. And then I found myself being like, oh, okay, I'm going to take my kids to the park. That's smoke weed. I'm going to go this. That's smoke weed. I'm going to go to the movies. That's smoke weed. Like it became this like additive to my head. And somehow I was tricking myself into thinking it adds maybe a new layer of fun or something along those lines.
Well, your question is a very interesting one. What I can say is if you take the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, it's made by the American Psychiatric Association. There's research behind it. It's not, it's not just some, text. But if you look at the symptoms of, quote, ADD or ADHD, and then you look at the symptoms of, quote, generalized anxiety disorder, and then you look at the research around trauma, you're going to see almost exact parallels. Right? So the 12-year-old kid who can't sit still in class and isn't doing his homework, does he have ADD, ADHD? Or is that kid's nervous system dysregulated, anxious, overwhelmed, can't focus? And maybe it's not a black and white thing. There's an element of these things. So I'm not debating the existence of ADD, ADHD. However, if you look at the diagnosis rates, it's insane how much it's gone up and continues to go up. Almost every kid that calls quantum, the parents saying they have ADD, ADHD. So again, with our clinical hypothesis I mentioned earlier, if I sense there could be an anxiety element, is it boredom, anxiety, somewhere in between? Let's target the nervous system. Let's see how you respond. And more often than not, what we see is, wow, all of a sudden the boredom doesn't seem so boring. All of a sudden you're a little more organized. You're able to So how much is anxiety playing on that just is masked otherwise,
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, without getting into my trauma, around the time I definitely had a lot of trauma as a young kid, around a very specific time, like 5 to 11, when it kicked off. And I grew up outside of Pittsburgh in the country, so they were just like, I was also hyper, but also in La La Land, so they didn't know what to do with me. I do see an outrageous amount. My older son is diagnosed, but his father and I kind of have it to the extreme. But one of the things I think that with the kids now, because every single kid, like you said, is ADHD, unregulated nervous system, anger issues. And the one thing we all did in common, my kids are 11 and 9, and over the last decade, without even trying, is like, hey, we're at the grocery store and you're 2, watch my phone so I can get grocery shopping done. And I really think there's something tied into kids and these quick screens we gave them from a very young age.
Yes, it's the opposite of presence.
Yes.
And the idea of emotional regulation, or even just living in the unknown. I was thinking about this morning. Think about the 90s. We're the same age, right? So think about the 90s. You have a house phone, and it rings, and you have no idea who the hell it is, and you just go hello.
Yeah.
Now you have a cell phone that even tells you the number and the location. And do people answer that phone? I call referrals back all day, and they'll call right back. Oh, sorry, I didn't know who you were, so I didn't answer. So just that right there, a simple example of how culture has changed so rapidly with anything I think of the opposite of anxiety is control. It's like on a seesaw. So the less control I have or perceived control, the more anxiety I feel. Wow. So 2 to 3 is the most brain development that happens in a human. So if I'm constantly, don't cry, here's the phone, no uncertainty, everything's fine. Like, we're not teaching kids to have any resilience emotionally. We're not training their nervous systems to be able to handle some stress and anxiety. And now you have AI and ChatGPT where kids don't even have to think enough to write a paper. Scary shit.
That scares me. I have a lot of professors that last week, 3 of them were in, and we talk a lot about it. And that scares me a ton. Is AI like just taking over all of our minds in the collective? That definitely scares me. That's again why I'm like, let's just get out of here and go to our commune in the woods.
It's major. And we have, co-regulation and mirror neurons, as I referenced before, this idea of like, I look for cues around me to keep me safe. This is why a 2-year-old kid who's learning to walk, when they fall, before they cry, they look around. Like, how am I supposed to respond? And that's why, as a parent, you intuitively go, it's okay,
Yeah.
right? This is deep, deep, deep programming biologically. The amount of teenagers I work with that fall asleep with their partner on FaceTime, that's become the new teddy bear.
Really?
Oh, it's like the majority. Anyone who's listening right now, if you have a teenager, ask them how many of your friends who, if they're in a relationship, they fall asleep on FaceTime. All night long, the phone. We won't talk about the radiation, all that kind of shit, but it's next to their head like this, and they're sleeping with their partner because they can't even fall asleep on their own. They're so overwhelmed and feeling so unsafe.
Wow. I have a niece who's 15 and has a boyfriend. I'm going to ask her about that. That's
Ask her and
freaky.
you DM me. I'll bet you she says it's super normal and she probably does it too.
Okay, I'm going to
So
ask her. I keep my phone and everything away because of the radiation. I want it like super far away from me. That's scary.
So we're from nature and nurture. We don't have time for epigenetics today, but that's another great thing to Google for your listeners. But when you combine these things together, it creates a really concerning soup of where we're heading culturally, especially in this part of the country, I would argue.
Where do you think we're headed?
I think it has to get worse before it gets better,
Absolutely.
And I mean, did you graduate high school 07?
Oh six.
06. Okay, I graduated 07, June. That was the month the iPhone came out,
Wow.
right? Now our generation is having kids that are growing up. And I think more and more parents I talk to who are our age, who remember the 90s and before cell phones and how things have shifted, they're having more intention around technology and what it means. So my hope is that the pendulum's swinging backwards. But I mean, as a culture, you look at the news and what's going, there's just lack of control, concerns. I don't know where we're heading, but I think it's got to get worse before it gets better.
I agree. And I know we're getting to the end of this episode, but for me, my kids, they do have iPads, which if I could go back in time, I even regret giving that. But my older son, I still won't give a phone. I'm pretty strict. I often say we just need to go back to the 90s in the world right now because there was like the book, The Anxious Generation. And I think my generation, like the kids that are like my niece and nephew's age, 14, 15, they're a little screwed right now. But they'll get through that. However, our generation is kind of like, no, this was not good to give people phones at 8 years old, 10 years old. And one thing I have noticed in the hair world is that I've always done teenagers. I do the whole family of hair, and kids were always able to just like, and I can get anyone to talk to me, talk. They were all different. And now, specifically since 2020, they are all robots. They don't budge from whatever they see as popular. 99% of people do it, buy it, say it. There was always an element of like 50% that did it, but another 50% who didn't care about trends. And they also like don't know how to talk to people, and they're very nervous, and it's almost like having a personality isn't good. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, I can get the 15-year-olds to talk though, who never had a phone yet. I have a couple of them, and they are just like back how it was 10, 15 years ago. But these ones who have had that screen for a long time, they're teenagers, they don't know how to converse.
Sure. And on a hopeful note as we end the time here, I will say that I think more than not, so I'll use the word majority, a majority of teens I work with and young adults who maybe don't remember before cell phones, they do have an intuitive awareness of how it's not helpful. Like they recognize social media's impact. They recognize like I'm addicted to my phone. They recognize like it's hard for me to sit in a doctor's office for 5 minutes and make small. Like they see it. They're not ignorant to these facts. So that gives me hope too that the younger generation I think is aware.
They are. They're becoming aware and more aware after they listen to this episode.
That's our hope, right?
They will. It will be there. Now, I want to end with this question. You can tell the listeners, the collective, out of everything we talked about, but when it comes to really regulating your nervous system, let's throw out one thing that they should start doing today. Even if it's just one thing, what would it be? Breath work, meditation? What would you suggest?
Sure. So it's hard to answer that concretely because again, everyone's a little different. We want to find a regimen that works. But if you want, I could take like 60 seconds to give a rundown of my general, what I give to most of my clients as a general start. So I would say meditation is very gentle. So if you're in a place where you find that if I just put on at least 7 minutes you want to go for. More days on than off. So if you have a 7 day week, 4 days out of seven at least. Or if you want to talk just during the week, 5 days, do at least three. Meditation's great. For some people, meditation's kind of hard. They can't break through. Their mind wanders too much. Then I say step it up with breath work. You go on YouTube, Wim Hof, breath work, 11 minutes, boom. So you're doing that more days on than off. Caffeine, coffee in the morning works against what we're doing. That's a stimulant for the autonomic nervous system. Try cacao, eat an apple for the natural sugar, things like this. In the shower, crank for the last 30 seconds or so, crank it as cold as you can stand and try to breathe through it. Don't just hate it and oh my God, this sucks. How much longer? Like breathe through it. Let's try the cold. Right? At night, we do meditation or body scan, we do journaling for a brain dump. That's kind of a good starting point for a few things that most people will find one or two they resonate with. Let's do more of what you like.
Okay. I love that. Thank you. I'm definitely putting in some more breath work myself. Thank you for coming on and sharing. I feel like we might have to do a part 2 because there's so much more to talk about and listen. Please let my listeners know where they can find you. We didn't even get to talk about, your amazing DJ stuff. So let us know where they can find you on tour, your music, your practice. Give us all the deets, and I'll also put this in the show notes.
Sure. So my organization is Quantum Holistic Psychotherapy Group. It's quantumpsychotherapygroup.com is the website. We're located in Jersey. Work with clients in Jersey and New York primarily. Instagram is Quantum Therapy NJ. We post a lot of offerings on there in person at our locations in Jersey, as well as virtual. Some cost money, some are free to the community. So Quantum Therapy NJ. For my music, that's a whole other thing we could talk about. There's a lot of spiritual element to that and healing support to that. That's Ghost Pipe NJ on Instagram is the best way to get me there. And I'm on tour up and down the East Coast this spring and summer.
And on your Instagram, you posted your tour as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. We'll add that to the show notes. Thank you again, Connor, for coming on, delivering us amazing information. I know myself and my listeners have a lot to think about with understanding themselves and their why. Thank you again for coming on to this show.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And thank you, listeners. I hope you tuned in and really enjoyed another interview. We're definitely going to have Connor back for part 2. Thank you, everyone. Love you and goodbye.